My name is Eleanor Cross. I'm 67 years old. And 3 weeks ago, my son stood up at his own anniversary dinner, in front of his in-laws, his boss, and 40 people holding champagne, and called his mother broke. He didn't whisper it. He announced it. He thought he was protecting his pride. What he didn't know is that the folder sitting in my purse, 6 feet away from his elbow, had a number in it that would end the conversation before it started. Here's the strange part, though. The worst moment of that night wasn't the word broke. It wasn't even the silence that followed it. It was the look on my son's face when he realized I wasn't going to cry. Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to see how this one ends. I raised Bradley alone from the time he was 9. His father, Walter, was a good mechanic and a decent man, but his heart gave out in a parking lot outside a Sears in 1998, and after that it was just the two of us and a house with a mortgage that felt like a mountain. I worked as a cafeteria supervisor for the Millbrook County School District for 31 years. Not glamorous. Hairnets and industrial dishwashers and budgets that had to balance to the penny because the district didn't forgive shortfalls. But here's what nobody tells you about counting other people's money for 3 decades. You learn to count your own. Every dollar Walter's life insurance paid out, I didn't touch. I let it sit, and then I learned, slowly, badly at first, then less badly, how to make it grow. Night classes at the community college. A library card I used more than my grocery card some months. A little green ledger book that used to be Walter's, where I wrote down every deposit in pencil so I could erase mistakes. By the time Bradley left for college, I owned the house outright. By the time he graduated, I owned a second one, a small duplex 2 streets over, rented to a nursing student and a young couple who never missed a payment. I never told him the numbers. That wasn't pride. That was just how I was raised. You don't hand a young man a number before he's built the character to carry it. There was a year, when Bradley was 14, when the furnace died in February and I paid for a new one in cash and told him we'd gotten a good deal from a neighbor. I let him believe, for years, that we scraped by. I let him believe it because I wanted him to learn how to work for what he had, not lean on what his mother had quietly built while he wasn't looking. Looking back, I wonder if that was the mistake. Not the saving. The silence around the saving. Bradley grew up, went into commercial real estate, and married a woman named Vanessa, whose family owned 3 car dealerships and a lake house they called the Cottage, which had 5 bedrooms. I liked Vanessa well enough. She had a sharp eye and an even sharper sense of who was worth her time. I don't think, for a long while, she thought that was me. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic with 210,000 miles on it. I clipped coupons at the ShopRite on Tuesdays because Tuesday was double points day. I wore the same wool coat to church for 11 winters. Vanessa's mother, Coral, once told me, kindly, she thought, that there was no shame in living simply. She had no idea. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The trouble started, as it usually does, with a phone call that began with the words, "Mom, can I ask you something?" Bradley wanted $50,000. Not a gift, he said. A bridge loan. He and Vanessa were trying to get into a development deal for townhomes outside Millbrook, and the bank wanted more skin in the game before they'd close. It's practically guaranteed, he told me. 90 days, tops, and I'll pay you back with interest. Better than your CDs are giving you, Mom. He said your CDs like he knew exactly what I had. 2 CDs, $12,000 each. That's what he assumed was the ceiling of his mother's entire financial life. I told him I needed a week to think about it. A week? He laughed, not unkindly, but not kindly either. Mom, it's not like you've got a portfolio to rebalance. If you've ever had someone underestimate exactly how much you're capable of, and smile while they do it, type "I see it" in the comments. You know that particular kind of quiet. I didn't say anything that day. I just said, "Let me think, Bradley," and hung up the phone, and sat at my kitchen table with Walter's old ledger, and did the math I already knew the answer to. I said no. Gently, but no. Real estate bridge loans between family members had gone wrong for people I knew, and 90 days has a way of becoming 9 months. Bradley didn't take it well. He didn't yell. He just went quiet in that particular way he has, the same quiet his father used when he was disappointed and didn't want to make a scene. 2 weeks later, Vanessa stopped returning my texts about babysitting the grandkids. 3 weeks after that, I wasn't invited to Sunday dinner for the first time in 4 years. I noticed. I always notice. But I didn't chase it. I buried a husband and raised a son alone. I know the difference between a door that's closed and a door that's locked. I want to explain something before I go further, because it matters to what happened next. I didn't just sit on that life insurance money for 25 years and call it a strategy. I worked at it. I took a financial literacy course at the community center taught by a retired credit union manager named Ranata, who became, over time, something between a mentor and a friend. She's the one who taught me about index funds back when everyone I knew thought the stock market was something that happened to other people. By the time Bradley called asking for $50,000, here's what my little green ledger actually said. The house, paid in full. Appraised value, $410,000. The duplex, paid in full. Appraised value, $380,000, plus 22 years of rental income invested straight into index funds. A retirement account I'd built from 31 years of a modest cafeteria supervisor's salary and matching contributions I never once skipped. $1.1 million. A separate brokerage account, the one Ranata helped me build, holding shares I'd bought slowly since 1999 and never sold, not once, not during 2008, not during 2020. $2.3 million. Add it up, and the number sitting quietly behind my Honda Civic and my 11-year-old wool coat was $4,200,000. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't hiding this out of some scheme. I was hiding it because the moment people know what you have, they stop seeing you and start seeing the number. I'd watched it happen to a friend of mine, Gail, whose children circled her like gulls the year after her husband's estate settled. I didn't want to be circled. I wanted to be visited because they loved me, not because they were doing due diligence on an inheritance. The trouble is, when you hide your strength that carefully, sometimes the people closest to you forget it exists at all. And Bradley had forgotten completely. It was my granddaughter, Megan, 16 years old, sharp as a tack, the only one of the grandkids who still called me just to talk, who told me what was actually happening at her parents' house. "Grandma," she said, over milkshakes one Saturday, "Dad's stressed about money." Like, really stressed. He and Mom fight about it at night when they think I'm asleep. About the townhome deal? She nodded. He put in his own savings. Like, most of it. And now the contractor wants more money and the bank won't budge, and I heard him tell Mom he thought you'd help because, she stopped. Because what, honey? Because he said, she's got nothing else to spend it on anyway. I want you to sit with that phrase for a second the way I had to. Nothing else to spend it on. As if a mother's whole financial life exists as a reserve fund for her son's ambitions. If you've ever heard a version of that sentence about yourself, that your money, your time, your whole self exists as a backup plan for someone else's dreams, write it in the comments. I promise you, you are not the only one. I didn't get angry that day. I got quiet. I got the particular kind of quiet that means I've stopped reacting and started planning. But quiet doesn't mean I stopped paying attention. 2 days later, I drove past Bradley and Vanessa's house on my way back from the pharmacy, and I noticed the SUV in the driveway had a dealer's temporary plate. A new lease. $68,000, I found out later, for a car they'd financed the same month. Bradley told me he couldn't sleep over a $50,000 gap. That's when the second thing bothered me. Not the money itself. The order of operations. A man who genuinely can't close a deal for lack of $50,000 doesn't lease a new SUV the same month. He finds the $50,000 somewhere else, or he waits. That same week, I called Ranada and asked her to help me pull together something I'd been putting off for years, a full, certified accounting of everything I owned, in language a stranger could understand in under a minute. Not because I intended to use it. I told myself that, at least. I told myself I just wanted to know where I stood. Then I called my lawyer, a steady, unshowy man named Marco who had drafted my will years earlier and had never once tried to talk me into anything flashy with my money. I want everything documented, I told him. Current statements. Certified. I want a single-page summary I could hand a stranger and have them understand my entire financial position in 10 seconds. Any particular reason, Eleanor? Not yet, I said. But I have a feeling I'll need it soon. The anniversary party invitation came by mail, actual mail, cream cardstock, Vanessa's handwriting on the envelope, 3 weeks before the event. 15 years married, held at the Belhaven Country Club, cocktail attire requested. I almost didn't go. Understand, I hadn't been to a family dinner in over a month. But a mother doesn't skip her son's 15th anniversary, whatever's simmering underneath. So I RSVP'd yes, and then I did something that surprised even me. I called Ranada and asked her to come as my guest. To an anniversary party? She laughed. Eleanor, what are you up to? I'm not up to anything, I said, which was almost true. I just don't want to walk in there alone. I also called Marco and asked him to have that one-page summary ready, printed, in a plain manila folder, no letterhead, nothing to draw the eye. Just in case. The morning of the party, I did something I hadn't done in 11 years. I went to the little boutique on Chestnut Street and bought a new dress, deep blue, simple, well cut. Not showy. Just mine. I put on the reading glasses Walter had given me for my 60th birthday, the ones with the thin gold frames I usually saved for church. I looked in the mirror longer than I meant to. There's a particular kind of fear that shows up right before you stop making yourself small for other people. I felt it that morning, standing in my kitchen with my car keys in my hand. I almost called Bradley to say I had a headache. I almost let the whole thing go quiet, the way it had gone quiet for a month already. But I thought about Megan's voice at the milkshake counter. Nothing else to spend it on anyway. And I put my coat on and I drove to the country club in my 210,000-mile Honda Civic, with a manila folder in my purse and a glass of confidence I'd been saving for 25 years. The Belhaven Country Club ballroom was the kind of room that makes you lower your voice without meaning to. Chandeliers. A string quartet warming up in the corner. Round tables of 10, white linen, little cards with names written in calligraphy. Vanessa's parents, Coral and her husband Harrison, were holding court near the bar, surrounded by people from the dealership and, I gathered, several of Bradley's business contacts, men in good suits who all seemed to know each other from somewhere other than family. Ranada arrived a few minutes after me, elegant in gray, and slid into the seat beside mine at table 6, which, I noticed, was not close to the head table. I didn't say anything about that. I've learned that where they seat you tells you plenty, if you're paying attention. Dinner went smoothly enough. Small talk. Someone's daughter had gotten into veterinary school. Someone's son had just closed on a boat. Then Harrison, Vanessa's father, turned the conversation toward the townhome project, the one Bradley hadn't gotten his $50,000 for. How's the development coming along, Bradley? Vanessa mentioned you hit a snag with financing. The room didn't go quiet. Not yet. But Bradley's jaw did something I recognized from when he was 12 and about to lie about a report card. We're fine, he said. Just waiting on some family support to close the gap. Harrison's eyebrows went up, friendly, curious. Family support? Didn't realize you had that kind of backing. And this is the part where I want you to understand my son wasn't a monster. He was embarrassed. He was standing in a room full of his wife's family, men who owned dealerships and boats, and he felt, I believe this, even now, genuinely small. Cornered. And cornered men say things they shouldn't. Bradley picked up his glass, half a laugh already forming, and gestured toward me at table 6. "Oh, I wouldn't hold your breath on Mom for that," he said, loud enough for the tables around us to catch it. She's not exactly sitting on a fortune. Bless her, she did her best, but let's just say Mom's more coupon Tuesdays than capital investment." A few people laughed, the uncomfortable kind of laugh people do when they're not sure if it's a joke. "She's basically broke," Bradley said, and now he was performing, writing the small laugh, trying to turn his own embarrassment into charm. "I love you, Mom, but you know it's true." Broke. He said it like it was an easy word. Like it cost him nothing. The string quartet kept playing softly in the corner. Nobody at the head table seemed to notice anything was wrong. Vanessa was looking at her plate. I felt Renata's hand find mine under the tablecloth, just for a second. A small squeeze. "Are you all right?" I was more than all right. I set down my fork. I reached into my purse and I took out the manila folder, and I set it, unopened, on the white tablecloth in front of me. Then I stood up. A room doesn't go silent all at once. It goes silent in rings, like something dropped in water. The people closest to you stop first, then the next table, then the next, until even the string quartet notices and the cellist lets her bow drift off the strings. I picked up my champagne glass. "Bradley," I said, and my voice did not shake, "I think it's time I said something I should have said a long time ago." He was still smiling, the way people smile when they think the joke is still landing. That smile started to slip. "I worked in a school cafeteria for 31 years, I said. I wore a hairnet longer than most people wear a wedding ring. I drove a car with 210,000 miles on it here tonight, and I'm not ashamed of a single mile of it." I opened the folder. "What I am," I said, "is $4,200,000 less broke than my son seems to think." The silence that followed lasted longer than the toast. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "The house is paid in full. $410,000. The duplex on Winslow Street, paid in full, $380,000, and it's been cash flowing since Bradley was in high school. My retirement account, built one modest paycheck at a time for 31 years, $1.1 million. My brokerage account, which I have not touched, not in 2008, not in 2020, not once, $2.3 million. I set the folder down so it faced the table, in case anyone wanted to check my math. $4.2 million, I said. $4. $2 million says otherwise, Bradley. Bradley found his voice, finally, thin and small. "Mom, I was just joking around, I know you were joking," I said. "That's what I want you to sit with. You didn't say it because you believed it. You said it because you were sure it was safe to say. Because you were sure I had nothing to prove otherwise." I let that land before I went on. "You've spent 4 years assuming your mother's whole financial life was 2 CDs and a Honda Civic, and you built an entire story about me around that assumption. Tonight I'd like you to build a new one." I raised my glass another inch. "To 15 years of marriage," I said. "And to knowing exactly what you're worth, even when the people closest to you don't." I drank. Harrison, Vanessa's father, a man I'd exchanged maybe 30 words within 4 years, was the first to speak into that silence, and it wasn't to save his own son-in-law. "Eleanor," he said slowly, standing up himself now, "I own 3 dealerships and I don't have a portfolio that clean." He looked at Bradley, "That's remarkable." Coral, who'd once told me kindly there was no shame in living simply, had gone the color of the tablecloth. Vanessa hadn't moved. She was staring at the folder like it might be a trick, and I understood that look, because for a moment even I almost couldn't believe I was finally saying it out loud after 25 years of silence. Bradley just stood there, champagne glass still in his hand, mouth slightly open, looking at his mother like he was seeing her, actually seeing her, for the first time in a very long while. If you've ever had a moment where the people who underestimated you finally saw the whole picture, all at once, tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one who's felt that particular kind of quiet triumph. Nobody applauded. This wasn't a movie. It was worse and better than that, it was real, and real things are messy, eh? Vanessa's mother, Coral, found me by the coat check an hour later, her composure mostly rebuilt. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I think I've spent 4 years assuming things about you that weren't true." "You're not the only one," I said, but I wasn't unkind about it. Coral had never been cruel. She'd simply believed what she was shown, and I'd worked very hard to show her exactly that. Bradley caught up with me in the parking lot as I was unlocking my Civic. His tie was loose. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since dinner started. "Mom." His voice cracked on the single word. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I could have said something sharp. I'd earned the right to, I think. Instead, I told him the truth. "Because the first time you asked me for $50,000, you didn't ask like a son checking in with his mother. You asked like a man checking a spreadsheet. And I wanted to know which one you actually were before I told you what I had." He didn't have an answer for that. Not that night. It took him 3 weeks to call and say the words instead of the excuses. When he finally did, it wasn't about money. He asked if he could come by on a Saturday, alone, no proposals, no folders of his own. He sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd done the math on his $50,000 ask, and he apologized. Really apologized, the kind that names the specific thing instead of gesturing at misunderstandings. "I called you broke in front of 40 people because I was ashamed of my own mistakes," he said, "and it was easier to make you small than to admit I'd overextended myself." That's the most honest sentence my son has said to me in a decade, and I believe every underestimated mother deserves to hear something like it eventually. I didn't give him the $50,000. I want to be clear about that. But I did sit down with him and Marco and go over what a responsible bridge loan actually looks like: terms, collateral, a repayment schedule that didn't depend on hope. We structured something smaller, at a real interest rate, with real paperwork, the way Ranata had once taught me to treat every dollar, family or otherwise. The townhome deal closed 2 months later. Slower than he wanted, cleaner than he deserved, honestly, given how it started. He also sold the SUV. Traded it for something modest, put the difference toward the loan he actually owed me, and told me, almost sheepish, that Vanessa had been the one to suggest it. She said if her mother-in-law could drive a 200,000-mile Civic with her head held high, we could manage a Toyota. I laughed the first time I heard that. Genuinely laughed, the kind I hadn't done with my son in longer than I want to admit. Vanessa and I have found something like an actual friendship since that night, which surprised me more than the folder ever did. She told me once, over coffee, that she'd never once asked Bradley what his mother actually had, because she'd simply assumed the answer wasn't worth asking about. That's the thing about assumptions, I told her. They're cheaper than the truth, right up until they're not. I still drive the Civic. It has 219,000 miles on it now, and I plan on getting a great deal more out of it before I let it go. I still clip the Tuesday coupons at the ShopRite, not because I have to, but because 31 years of counting other people's lunch money teaches you that habits built in scarcity are worth keeping even after scarcity ends. But I don't hide the number anymore. Not because I want anyone circling it. Because I learned something at that anniversary dinner that I wish I'd learned decades earlier: silence, when it's meant to protect you, can also end up protecting the people who underestimate you. Love your family. Help them when you can, and when it's right, not when it's demanded. But don't ever let someone, not your son, not your daughter, not anyone, mistake your quiet for your ceiling. Megan calls me every Saturday now, still, just to talk. Last week she asked me, half joking, if I was going to teach her about index funds someday. I told her I already had a green ledger book with her name half-written in the front cover. If tonight's story reminded you of your own quiet strength, the kind nobody sees until the moment you finally raise your glass, type $4. 2 million inch in the comments, and subscribe to Alpha Mom Stories. There's another story next week, and I promise you, she's just as far from broke as I was.